I love the lyrics in the song that every scar is a lesson and I'm learning to be brave. And so it is with great joy that we begin our celebration this morning together, recognizing that there is one life, and that life is whole, it is perfect, it is complete. And as we celebrate the season of Easter, what we know is that life is filled with love. And so this morning we continue our global theme for 2021, and that is timeless wisdom, evolutionary vision. Our theme for the month of April and our series is stepping into the unknown, stepping into the unknown. And today we are going to look at the path less traveled. Easter metaphysically is the season of rebirth and renewal. The symbolic nature of Easter is the process of dying to the old self and being reborn in a spiritual sense. Easter is a powerful metaphor that allows us to re-examine our current state of being and open to the ongoing evolution. It is the story of love. Easter is the story of love. It's the story of God's love. In the month of March, our evolutionary journey invited us to embrace being open to the highest possibility for God's expression as our life, being open to the highest vision by asking the question, what is Spirit's highest possibility for my life? And we live in this question through the practice of spiritual visioning and allow the vision to reveal itself in a multiplicity of ways. For April, we continue the evolutionary journey by embracing change and curiosity as we step into the unknown using practical spirituality. Change and curiosity reminds me of being around little children as they're, especially as they're moving from that crawling to toddler stage, where there's just a curiosity about everything that is right at eye level. And I know as parents and as grandparents, we're very mindful of what was at eye level. They certainly teach us about what to move around and identify things that can easily become something that goes into the mouth, which is something we want to avoid. However, that is their journey of exploration, journeying into that unknown, taking that path less traveled. And so as we take the path less traveled, we are assured that we are transformed by it. And as the vision for our life continues to unfold, the path is revealed with each step, and our faith guides us along the way. To identify the spiritual values and practices required to help navigate the path less traveled, we turn to our evolutionary vision expressed in our Centers for Spiritual Living Global Vision and the timeless wisdom of the teachings of our Science of Mind principles, core concepts, and values. The evolutionary vision statement for today is, we envision a world where every person discovers their personal power and their ability to create an individual life that works within a world that works for everyone. And I add, right where they are. So what we are embarking upon in this evolutionary vision is recognizing and knowing that there is a world where every person discovers their personal power and their ability to create an individual life that works for them, that works for the world, and for everyone around. And then our timeless wisdom statement from our Science of Mind principles. We believe in the eternality, the immortality, and the continuity of the individual soul forever and ever expanding. As I said earlier, Easter is a celebratory occasion. It is the time to look at the spiritual evolution of Jesus the Christ, who is represented, who is a representation of the promise of humanity. Jesus' life is a powerful example of the path less traveled. And for those of us who have actually studied the life of Jesus, we recognize that Jesus was a radical evolutionary. Uh, Jesus was a social activist, and you see from what's recorded in the scripture of his life work that he did not play favorites. He did not take any hostages. And one example of him being a revolutionary and radical evolutionary is that he dared to go against the grain of the religion into which he was born. And I think those of us who have come into the teaching of science of mind from another discipline or another practice feel sometimes that we may be radical evolutionaries, or our families may have labeled us as that because we've gone against the religion that we were born into. But here's an example of how Jesus describes himself. And he says, and this is in Matthew 5:17, "Don't misunderstand why I have come. I did not come to abolish the law of Moses or the writings of the prophets. No, I came to accomplish their purpose." I came to accomplish their purpose. And so let's take a look at the meaning of their purpose. Their purpose, as revealed by Jesus, was an evolutionary leap into the full force of love and the revelation of oneness with God and oneness with humanity. And I think this is expressed best by Jesus saying, "I and the Father are one." And we know that within our teaching, we believe that all life is an act of creation. And this creative energy, this creative expression, we call God, we call creative source, we call divine guidance, divine intelligence, many names we have for the nameless. But I think if we look at Jesus's life, we can see that truly that evolutionary leap that he took describes for us the timeless wisdom and the truth that enables us to see the eternality, the immortality, and the continuity of the individual soul forever and ever expanding. This same insight brings us into the full awareness of heaven within. Heaven being a state of consciousness that is the eternal now. Heaven is that state of consciousness. It is the eternal now in which we live moment by moment by moment. Our founder, Ernest Holmes, viewed Jesus as the most highly developed spiritual master that the world has ever known. According to Holmes, one of the most powerful insights of Jesus was that God and humanity are one. And we find the reference for this in our Science of Mind textbook on page 459. And also we find the context for this in the scripture in Matthew, the 22nd chapter, verses 36 to 41. And in this passage in Matthew, Jesus is discussing the two great commandments. And he says that the first commandment, and I'm paraphrasing and shortening, the first commandment, the first great commandment, is that we love the Lord with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our mind. And then he goes on to say the second is like unto it, that we love our neighbor as ourselves. And it is on these two great commandments that the law and the prophets are based. So he did not come again to destroy the law and the writings of the prophets. He came to reinforce them as a guide to daily living, a guide to the way that we live our lives. Holmes further indicates that Jesus' resurrection and subsequent disappearance of the body was a result of the spiritualization of his consciousness. through which he achieved another plane. Now, this other plane was not a place, but it was actually an unleveling of Jesus's consciousness. Jesus taught that his high state of consciousness is acceptable to everyone. And as we study the teachings of Jesus, as we study the life of Jesus, we find that he continually reminds us that of my own, I do nothing. It is the Father within. And we believe that we are all creations of this infinite intelligence, or creations of what Jesus described as the Father. So it is that infinite intelligence within that allows us to do all great things. Jesus said, again, these things I do, you can do even greater, meaning that we are one with all of humanity. We are one with this creative intelligence. Now, when we look at the story of the last days of Jesus's life, we see an outline for living a fully realized spiritual life. Excuse me. What is traditionally called or identified as the last words of Jesus can actually be summed up in 3 sentences that affirm spiritual practices, and we can take these into our daily lives. Remember, I said earlier that this teaching, the principles of science of mind, and as we journey into this unknown, as we travel the road we travel that path of the unknown, we have a guide for spiritual living. And so these 3 sentences are summed up as a guide for our daily living. And the first one is, we begin with, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And this statement by Jesus speaks to the state of spiritual development of humankind and the deep love and compassion that Jesus feels for humanity. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. We are reminded, as we unpack this a little bit more, we are reminded that love is ascendant over law. Love propels the law into action, and forgiveness is the spiritual practice that purifies the soul. Next, we look at Jesus's demonstration of his understanding of the importance of every human being that was recorded throughout his life. As you study the life of Jesus, as you study the teachings of Jesus, we learn that there were no social hierarchies or social boundaries that he could not cross. He was equally at ease with the outcast as well as the social elite. An example of this is when Jesus spoke to the criminal, who was able to see the true nature of Jesus the Christ. And Jesus said to the criminal, I tell you the truth, today you will be with me in paradise. And of course, we realize that paradise is where the kingdom of heaven lies. Again, it is a state of consciousness. It is not a place. And going back to forgiveness, this is where we witness the shift that takes place within the criminal. The criminal was able to make that leap of faith to forgive himself for what he had done in his life before the moment of his encounter with Jesus. This moment, he is transformed into the eternal now. And we see in this brief narrative, this brief description of the shift that took place within the criminal, it says that he made a leap of faith. And he did this and he forgave himself for what his life was like before the moment that he had his encounter with Jesus. In this moment, he was transformed. And so that means the shift in consciousness can come in a moment's notice, in a moment's time. It all depends on our readiness through our spiritual practices, through our devotion, through knowing and realizing the truth that God is all there is. And the third sentence that gives evidence to the fulfillment of spiritual way of living, Jesus, fully aware that he had fulfilled his life purpose, says, "It is finished. It is finished." Now, Jesus knew that he had full authority over his life, and he had spoken about this very powerfully in his teachings. He had the authority to lay down his life and to take it up again. And no one could take his life from him unless he willingly allowed this to happen. And this perhaps is the most powerful challenge of the teachings of Jesus. We recognize through all of this that as a fully realized spiritual being, Jesus accepts the particular circumstances that he is faced with, and he can see beyond the appearances. And this is what we are called to do and to be in our lives. We are to see beyond the particular circumstances that we are faced with, recognizing that this is temporary, this is passing by. We see beyond the appearances, and we surrender into the reality of knowing that I and the Father are one. This is the reality of the teachings of Jesus. This is the reality of the teachings and the practices and the principles of science of mind. When we consider the Jesus story that has been articulated in all parts of the earth, it is a demonstration and powerfully resonates within us today. It's an illustration of the path less traveled and this path that is available to everyone. Forgiveness is a powerful spiritual practice, especially for such a time as this, where our world is divided with hate and other divisions of all kinds. Jesus was a patient master teacher who taught us to forgive 70 times 7, or as often and as long as it takes to reach repentance and to realize a change in consciousness. And in our practice of forgiveness, this brings us back to what I identified earlier as the evolutionary vision that is a part of our tradition of science of mind. And the evolutionary vision is a world in which each person discovers their personal power and their ability to create an individual life that works for them within a world that works for everyone. And so by practicing the power of forgiveness, by recognizing that yesterday ended last night, I can move forward beyond the appearances, knowing that it is the spirit, the creative spirit that lives within me that does the work, that allows me to recognize that forgiveness is a way of fulfilling my life's desire. And so as we contemplate these 3 sentences on the last words of Jesus, allow yourself the freedom that patience, kindness, compassion, and forgiveness afford. Feel your heart open as you truly forgive, beginning with yourself. Often when we teach forgiveness classes, we identify something outside of ourselves to forgive, because it's generally easier to forgive something outside of ourselves rather than it is to forgive ourselves. But forgiveness begins with self. Self-forgiveness is the basis for opening our hearts. Again, be patient with yourself and with others, and allow the compassion to overflow from your big heart. Whatever your soul's mission is, forgiveness will support you in fulfilling it. And as Ernest Holmes offers this as another illustration of the teachings of Jesus, one of the outstanding things that Jesus taught was the mistakes of yesterday can be canceled. The mistakes of yesterday can be canceled. That may have been the greatest challenge. But no matter what, the experiences of whatever the experiences of yesterday may have been, they can be changed. And so as we conclude our time together for this presentation, offer these questions for your personal reflection based on our topic for today, the path less traveled. What is calling me to discover patience, kindness, compassion, and forgiveness on the path less traveled? And I have invited our tech team to place these comments into the chat and into the comments section on our Facebook page so that you may have them for your reflection. So I will say number one again. What is calling me to discover patience, kindness, compassion, and forgiveness on the road less traveled? What is calling me to open my heart and embrace what I have learned and where I have grown on the path less traveled? And finally, what mistakes will I release, knowing the experience of yesterday can be changed as I embrace that which supports me on the path less traveled? And our affirmation for the week is, I live, move, and have my being in divine mind. I live, move, and have my being in divine mind. And now I invite us to pray together. In this season of rebirth and renewal, I recognize and know that there is a power and a presence for good in this life. And this power and this presence is available to me at all times, in all ways, and in all places. I am one with absolutely all that there is. And as this is the truth for me, I affirm it, I declare it, and I know it for each one that is a part of this celebration, a part of this local and virtual community known as the Monterey Center for Spiritual Living. How good it is that we gather together in this time as family, as friends, as extensions of the divine expression of creativity. How good it is that we are celebrating the Easter season of rebirth, knowing that we have a beautiful lesson in nature to look at how everything is springing forth in beautiful color, in the varieties of the plants and the flowers. Just as the bouquet of flowers are appearing in nature, this bouquet of individualized expressions of spirit appear here through the magic of technology. How good it is to just look around and to see the beauty that is expressed, the uniqueness that is expressed right here, right now, in this very moment. And as we practice our spiritual principles, beginning with the practice of forgiveness, recognizing that yesterday ended last night. If we take nothing more than that away, remembering that yesterday ended last night, we move forward into the season of rebirth and regeneration, knowing that all is truly well. I speak a word of blessing for all places where people are gathering, recognizing the oneness of life, acknowledging all traditions, all teachings, all philosophies, remembering that all paths lead to the same source. However that source is identified, all paths lead to the same source. And I speak my word of blessing this morning for all who have a prayer request that they're holding in the depths of their hearts. Knowing that just the thought of the prayer, the thought that is emerging, that whatever it is that I am requesting of spirit, the answer is already yes. And so as we articulate that prayer to a practitioner, to a spiritual guide, to a spiritual coach, to a confidant, knowing that even as we move beyond thinking it to speaking it into the universe is always saying yes. So whatever the prayer request is, I know that it is done and it is done magnificently in the mind of God. And so giving thanks for this and so much more, knowing that the demonstrations are being revealed even now, I release this word into the law, which always says yes. I let it go. I let it be. I know that it is done. And we affirm it by saying, and so it is. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And now it is our opportunity to participate in the divine flow of circulation through the spiritual substance that is known as money. We have an abundant statement that says, I recognize the presence of God within as the source of my abundance. Out of my abundance consciousness flows everything I could desire in life. With gratitude and thanksgiving, I now participate in the flow of interrupted abundance. I release this visible supply as an outer symbol of my inner supply into the physical world. This prosperous experience is evidence of my abundance consciousness. And we share with you on our screen the ways that you can participate and experience the law of circulation by supporting the Monterey Center for Spiritual Living. We are ever grateful for the generosity and the givingness of the spiritual community. It is through your generosity that we are able to continue to broadcast through the means of technology. We're able to offer classes, we're able to offer workshops. And we do have an upcoming event that I would like to promote now. It is posted, the details are in our newsletter. But coming up in a couple of weeks, we are initiating what I'm calling Connections Conversations. And this is an opportunity for us to come together and have those sometimes described as hard conversations, but the conversations that allow us to move into a place of forgiveness, those conversations that allow us to gain clarity around some of what our thoughts are, what some of the expressions are that we use quite often unconsciously, or things that we have been taught that no longer serve us. So I invite you to consider participating in that. It will be on Wednesday evenings from 6:30 to, I think 6:30 to 8 or 6:30 to 7:30. I forget now what the time frame is, but check our newsletter for that. And as always, we welcome our Facebook family and we welcome those who will be viewing us via YouTube. Thank you for being a part of this virtual community. Thank you for being a part of our local community. We love you, we appreciate you, and we thank God for you.